Shannon Sharpe.
Shannon Sharpe?
I jumped on that Lakers in 5 bandwagon. I did not trust Julius Randle. I still don't trust Julius Randle.
This is what I'm saying, Jack. If the Timberwolves win, I would not be surprised. And it seems like you're counting them out, and I think that's a big, big mistake.
You notice there's one guy we're not talking about either. Question I want to ask you is, let's get it. Welcome back to another edition of the Hampton Show. Joel, how are we feeling today?
I'm feeling great. The last time we talked was last week, and now we've gotten more clarity on some of these first-round series. It's going to be a lot of good ones. I think there are 4 first-round series that are going to go down to the wire, that we don't know who's going to win, and I think it's pretty exciting.
Absolutely. Today, we are reacting to the first week of the NBA playoffs and determining winners and losers of every single series. We're going to go in the exact same order as we did last week. We're going to start with that 2-7 series out west, the Golden State Warriors versus the Houston Rockets. Who has been the biggest winner of this series so far?
It has to be Alperen Sengun. When you think about the Rockets and before we got into the playoffs, everybody didn't know how Houston Stars were going to react to this big of a moment. Jalen Green drops 38 points in game 2 on absurd efficiency. It was a great bounce back game from game 1. And we know that's what he's capable of when he can play really well. But the problem is there's too many highs and lows with him. Yep. And Alperen Sengun, there was some comparisons drawn to Domantas Sabonis and whether or not Sengun would get outplayed or played off the court in the series because he can't guard in space. And I think in these first 2 games, he's done a really good job as a defender and being impactful on that and showing that he's not a liability, and he's kind of separating himself from those archetypes that we look at and say those don't translate the best of the playoffs because Sengun has played really well.
It reminds me of Jokic early in his career, too, because that was the kind of narrative around him. Put him in the pick and roll. We'll expose him defensively because he has to be out there offensively. Sengun doesn't have to be great, but like the Nuggets 2023 championship run, they just had to be good enough. I think Denver was 15th in defensive efficiency, so Sengun on the defensive side of things has held up a lot better than I thought. My winner was what you mentioned, that Jalen Green game 2 performance, 38 points. The Warriors have always been susceptible to all-star caliber guards. You saw it with Ja Morant in 2022. We talked about last week, Jalen Green has to be phenomenal if the Rockets want to make this a long series, if they have a real chance. But the same questions remain for me. Can he consistently be great enough? And will that even be enough? Because with Ja Morant, he eventually got hurt, but I don't know if it was enough to beat the Warriors in 2022. So Jalen Green has to be consistently great and play at that level to give the Rockets a chance in this series. Or somebody else has to go down, and that's what happened with Jimmy Butler in game 2 as well. The loser of this series for me is his injury. I've been wrong about a lot of playoff predictions so far, but one thing that we have discussed ad nauseum is that the Warriors are the one team who needs to stay healthy the most. We have seen that clean divide, and every Warriors-Rockets game so far and every Warriors game on national television has had that graphic of before Jimmy Butler, after Jimmy Butler. That is the biggest loser of the series. He gets an MRI. We're recording on Thursday. We don't know the results of that MRI yet, but that is the biggest loser of the series for sure.
If Jimmy Butler is not 100%, I think the Warriors are in real danger of losing this series. If he misses 1 to 2 games, I think there's a real possibility they lose the series. They cannot afford to not have him on the court. We saw how the Warriors looked before Jimmy Butler. They were one of the worst teams in the league. They weren't a playoff team, and the offense looked terrible. Steph Curry has to shoulder such a huge load, and in his minutes, they were just a -3, so they still were competitive throughout the entire game. It's just those other lineups when Spencer came in the game with Kuminga, with Gus Santos and Draymond Green, where they couldn't generate any offense whatsoever. And Kuminga, who's been iced out of the rotation out of nowhere, suddenly gets 20-plus minutes of playing time because somebody needs to step up in the absence of Jimmy Butler, and Jimmy and Kuminga lineups have not worked, so that's why he's been benched, because Jimmy Butler's not been able to play well with him on the court, and they haven't been able to fit together. But I think the Warriors, everything is hinging on whether or not Jimmy Butler is going to be good, because if he's not, I think this series is over.
Stan Van Gundy said something very interesting last night. Whenever after Jimmy Butler had went out, Stephen Curry was not in for several minutes. And he had said if the Warriors were down 0-1 right now, he would be on the court right now and would likely be on the court for the remainder of the game. I think the game three approach from Steve Kerr, whether Jimmy Butler is out there or not, will be very different than game two. It's hard to have a mindset knowing you already got one on the road and flipped home court advantage to then throw everything out there in game two. I don't know if the series is over, but they're definitely in deep, deep trouble if Jimmy Butler doesn't come back. Let's go to the 2-7 out east. What was your reaction to the first two games of Celtics Magic, and do you have any winners or losers?
The winner is the Celtics supporting cast. It's just overwhelmingly great. And I think in the modern NBA, we often talk about star power, but I think the depth guys matter just as much. You can have two stars that are better than another team's two stars, but if that team has better depth, then that team's going to be better. The Celtics with Tatum and Jaylen Brown, that is one of the best duos in the NBA. Do I think it's better talent-wise than Dame and Giannis? I don't. But what separates those two teams is the fact that the Celtics have Porzingis and Derek White and Drew and Peyton Pritchard and Al Horford, and that's what separates it. And Jaylen Brown had a great performance in game two against the Magic with no Jason Tatum. And I think, winner-wise, it's their supporting cast. Loser-wise, I got to go with Orlando supporting cast. There's no help around Paolo and Franz Wagner. And I don't think the Magic are all that far from being a serious contender out east. They just don't have the necessary pieces around Paolo and Franz to be that right now. But I think one offseason of good moves can change that. We saw with the Pistons just bringing in Malik Beasley and Tim Hardaway Jr. and Tobias Harris change the landscape of their team entirely. So with the Magic, it's about bringing in players that fit, and what that means is just bringing in more shooters.
Yes. My loser of this series thus far is every guard on the Orlando Magic's roster. Anthony Black, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Corey Joseph, Cole Anthony, and Gary Harris are averaging a combined 14 points in the series. That is how much those guys are averaging combined, 14 points a game. This summer, it's not about if the Magic will make a blockbuster move, it's when. I think as far as the winners, it's similar to the vein that you just highlighted. Jaylen Brown, we were worried about his injury going into this series. His health has been a winner of this series. He showed that will not affect him for this playoff run. And I'm going to throw Paolo Banchero in as a winner too, because the supporting cast has not been good. But Joel, you went on this podcast a few weeks ago. You said Franz Wagner was the best guy on this team. All I needed to see from Paolo is for him to resubmit himself as the best player on this team, him to elevate his play in the postseason, and he has done both of those things. He's averaged 34 points in this series and has reintroduced himself as a future All-NBA player that he is.
He's averaging 29 in the series, in the playoffs in his career. 29 points per game in the playoffs. Okay. 41% from three, which I think is an unsustainable number given the fact that he doesn't shoot that well in the regular season.
Yep, pick a hole.
He's an excellent player. There's no doubt about it. When you're also the main guy getting all the touches on your team, you're probably going to put up good numbers.
But also when you don't have a supporting cast, you're also going to get doubled. I mean,
there's no doubt about it. But, with the amount of shots that he takes, with the diet that he takes, with the shot selection that he has, when he's making it, it looks like this. And since the All-Star break, he's been one of the better players in the league. I do think that Franz is still a better connector than him. I think he makes the game easier for everybody around him. He's more of a play finisher. He's more of a downhill attacker. I think the thing with Paolo is if he can play like he's 6'10", 250, that changes a lot of things. Because early in the season, he was settling for mid-range jump shots when he was an inefficient mid-range jump shooter. He's 6'10" and 250. And as recently, he's driving to the basket more. And that's what he should do at that size. And when he plays like that and he's getting more efficient shots, he looks better. And I think that's what we're seeing.
He's going to continue to learn that as his career goes on. But seeing this early in his career, and we're going to talk about Cade Cunningham in a little bit, Paulo is continuing what we saw from him last postseason, and that he can be the number one guy on an Eastern Conference Finals type team. They just have to fill in around him. And with this lack of supporting cast, I think it's even better that he's putting up the numbers he is. Let's go back to the West. Lakers, Timberwolves. I got a lot of admissions to talk about with this series, but you go ahead and kick us off.
I'm interested to see the admissions that you're talking about. I hope it's not false information, Jack. I really hope it's not the case.
There's no false information. There's four losers of this series.
It's hard to come up. Shannon Sharp?
Shannon Sharp is a loser, and I am a loser. Mike Conley is a loser, which was the one thing I was right about in this series, and Jackson Hayes is a loser. Shannon Sharp is a loser this week for a variety of reasons, but I jumped on that Lakers in 5 bandwagon. I did not trust Julius Randle. I still don't trust Julius Randle, but Jaden McDaniels on the offensive end has been phenomenal, and I was not expecting that. I still got the Lakers in this series, but obviously not in 5 games like I predicted last week. I will stand on Minnesota having to win this series like they won game 1 in blowout fashion, because if it's close, I still don't trust them down the stretch. Mike Conley has been predictably bad. Jackson Hayes has been in a whole nother category of worse. He's virtually unplayable right now. JJ Redick knows that. He's averaging 8 minutes in this series, and I expect him to play less than that in game 3. Sorry to interrupt, but I had to get it off my chest.
No, you're good. I think it's perfect. It leads into the conversation because in game 1, I thought Jackson Hayes wasn't helped all that much by his perimeter defenders. In game 2, I thought he was just awful. Just bad fouls, this goaltending call he had, which was, it's clear that the ball was already on its way down, and he just blocked the shot and got so energized after it when it wasn't going to count. I don't think that he's playable in this series, and that's the biggest question mark that everybody had about the Lakers is that do they have a center that they can trust? And not playing with the center is very difficult because it just limits you on what you can do defensively. It limits what you can do offensively if you don't have a lob threat, especially in the pick and roll. Now everything is pick and pop and ISO and downhill drives and driving kicks. So I think overall, it's just very hard to play without one. And that's why we saw the Mavericks when they got Gafford and the ascension of Lively as a rookie, they made it to the finals because they were just so important to them. I think it's hard to pick winners and losers from this series because it is tied 1-1 right now. But if I had to go with a winner, I think it has to be Julius Randle. Julius Randle got knocked for being a terrible playoff performer. And at game 2, he had 27 points, Jack, and that's the most points he's ever had in a playoff game.
Wow.
In his career. In game 1, he also was pretty solid. Overall, these first 2 games, Julius Randle is playing really well for the Minnesota Timberwolves, and I think he's been a huge positive. And then, this is an under-the-radar guy, somebody that people have slandered him and said, he's going to be unplayable this series, and it's Rudy Gobert because Minnesota's better when he's on the court. And you look at his defensive field goal percentage, it's below 40%. He's forcing these dudes into tough shots. They are missing them. There are some plays where he gets got, just like every defender. But overall, Rudy Gobert has been good in this series. So I think just the underrated guys, the guys that get attacked on Minnesota, they're the winners. And then, of course, Luka Doncic. He's shown up in a big way in game 1 and in game 2. LeBron and Reeves had better game 2s, but still not the most efficient games. LeBron wasn't that efficient from the field outside of the last couple of shots in the fourth quarter. And Reeves had some big shots, but he also wasn't very efficient. So Luka has been carrying and shouldering the load of this offense. And in those lineups without Luka on the court, you kind of see the limitations of the Lakers offense. So when he's on the court, they're just a different team. And then the losers, Jackson Hayes, you mentioned. And yeah, we're going to go with the loser being everybody that thought this series was going to be some type of wash.
Just say my name,
because
bro.
Minnesota is a legitimate team. And if they won this series, I wouldn't be shocked. I still do have the Lakers in 7 because of the clutch time offense that you highlighted, but Minnesota has a realistic chance in this series to upset the Lakers.
The fact that you mentioned 2 players before Luka Doncic and the winners of this series is exactly what I expected. Julius Randle continued to slob on his knob. We'll see how it goes. 27 points being a career high in the playoffs and as many postseason games as he's played in, to me, is inexcusable. Rudy Gobert,
he's played like 10.
Okay, but he's played 10 and he was an all NBA player in those 10 games. Wasn't he all NBA that year for the Knicks?
Yes, the first year we made the playoffs against the Hawks when Trae Young did us in the Garden. The starting lineup was Elfrid Payne, R.J. Barrett, Taj Gibson, and Reggie Bullock.
Who was guarding him on the Hawks?
Is getting doubled. Yeah, that he's so good, he's getting doubled. And then
I
the next
expect more
series,
from an all NBA player in the playoffs.
I
We're not talking about
understand,
all
but
star, all NBA.
in the next series, when he played the Cavaliers, he was hurt. He was coming off an injury, so Julius Randle hasn't played that many playoff games. And the first two with Minnesota, he's playing really well.
And you talk about all this belief in Julius Randle, all this belief in Minnesota, but you're still picking the Lakers. And the reason I was so mad, you
Absolutely.
mentioned two players ahead of Luka Doncic. Luka is the only reason they have a series win. He's averaging 34, 10, and 5. LeBron James is barely averaging 20 points in the series. He is the winner. It's not Julius Randle. It's not Rudy Gobert for averaging 4 points and just being able to play in this series. It is Luka Doncic.
So you don't think Julius Randle was one of the winners? You thought he'd be terrible, and here he is shining, and he had more points in game 2 than Cat.
I thought he would be terrible, and I have been wrong through 2 games, but he's not a winner of this series. You notice there's one guy we're not talking about either. Anthony Edwards.
The one guy.
Anthony Edwards.
He's played great.
For this series to go 7 games, I think he has to take a step up. Yes, he had, I think, 25 in game 2. Yes, he had 25 in game 2, but you cannot watch that game and tell me he has been the Anthony Edwards of old. And after watching my Grizzlies, we'll get to that later. Your indictment last week, your accusation of me being jealous of this team, you may be right. Because the shit I've been watching for the last week has, I have a lot on my mind with that too. But I think we can agree to disagree about the winners of this series. But the losers we definitely agree on. Let's get to something that's close to home for you before we get into something that's close to home for me. 3-6 series out east. Knicks, Pistons. The winner of this is simple. It's Cade Cunningham. The loser is Tom Thibodeau. The question I want to ask you, Joel, is what move can the Knicks make this summer that would actually give you, a Knicks fan, hope against a Boston, against a Cleveland? And we can move on and talk about what's happened in this series.
Number one, I just want to say I told you so. I told you this would be a tough series. I told you that I don't trust the Knicks and I don't trust Cat. And he had 10 points in game 2, and he wasn't featured in the offense down the stretch, which I think is a Tom Thibodeau problem. I think your winners and losers are 100% correct. There is no move outside of the Knicks trading for a true, legit superstar that would make me comfortable about the direction of the team. I think they're stuck in mud. I think they traded too many assets to go get Cat and Mikal. And when you make 2 blockbuster trades like that, you're expected to take a major jump. And I think the Knicks have not done that this year. The Cat trade was more tolerable than the Mikal trade. But the reason why I didn't like the Cat trade was because you trade an all-star in Randall, and you trade a great role player in Dante, and you trade a first-round pick, which is going to be in the middle of the first round as well, to go get Cat. And watching Cat in Minnesota, as somebody who's one of Anthony Edwards' biggest fans, I call a lot of Minnesota games. I just don't think he raises his game in high leverage moments. I think he's too inconsistent. I don't think he's a true secondary star that you can consistently rely upon. He has moments. Game 7, second round against Denver. People will point to that. But I'll point to the conference finals where he shot 35% from the field and 20% from 3 and was terrible in that series. I point to his overall playoff numbers where in the regular season, he's averaging 23 and 11, and in the playoffs is a 19 and 9, and the efficiency gets worse as well. So I think that's one of the things. The fact that the Knicks are relying on Cat to be their second best player is an issue. I think Mikal Bridges, the 5 first-round picks, obviously a big issue, trading for him, and he was 0 for 4 in the fourth quarter, didn't hit no big shots. I think overall the Knicks need to make a Giannis-type move for me to feel comfortable in them, but I think they've just made too many bad moves over the last 2 to 3 years that they really shot the depth. I talked earlier on this show about how important depth is, and you can't get it done with a top-heavy lineup. And the Knicks are as top-heavy as it gets. They don't have bench players they rely upon. I think they gave up on Quentin Grimes way too early because he was having a bad season. They traded him to the Pistons for nothing, and now He's playing really good, and I think at worst he's a really good role player. So they let him go. Isaiah Hartenstein, because of the CBA rules, they could not keep him, and he has been one of the most elite role players in the league this season. And had you had Quentin Grimes and Isaiah Hartenstein still on this team,
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about a different team that has more depth. Like in a perfect world, even if we made the Mikal Bridges trade, I think it would have been fine. But in a perfect world, if the Knicks had Brunson and Mikal and OG and Randall and Hartenstein and Mitch off the bench with Quentin Grimes, with Josh Hart, with Dante DiVincenzo, I think that's a much better team. It's a more well-rounded team overall that can go 9 to 10 players deep. So I think this team, there's only like 6 or 7 players that you trust, and that's the major problem.
The Karl Anthony Towns thing is fascinating. I understand where you're coming from. I think it's more of him having to play such a big role at the five. I believe Karl Anthony Towns is best at the four, not having to be an anchor of a defense. I think if they were able to get more from Mitchell Robinson, you would see a better version of Karl Anthony Towns. Like you said, if they still had Isaiah Hartenstein, you would get a better version of Karl Anthony Towns. I'm not sure if he's a number two option on a finals team, but I do know he's a number two option on a Western Conference finals team. You're right. It is roster construction. Kevin Durant is not the answer. I'm ready to go ahead and say that. Do you agree with that as well?
I don't think he is. I think he's too old. You're betting on 1 or 2 years max of Kevin Durant, and I think it puts them in a bad position overall when you're paying Brunson the money you're paying him. Although he took a pay cut, he's still getting paid a lot of money, and you're paying Cat 50 mil, and you're paying OG 40 mil. You don't have any money left to sign anybody. That's the biggest thing New York is going to run into.
Has Tom Thibodeau, has that ran its course? Is there a ceiling that we're now seeing that we have seen throughout Tom Thibodeau's career that you feel like they could be ready to part ways?
I think there's absolutely a ceiling. I think if we lose in the first round, you part ways with him. You don't think twice about it. I think if we make it to the second round and make it at least a tough competitive series, you can't move on from him. I think the thing that I'm most upset about, and I think I noticed it the first time we made the playoffs with Randall, was the defense was supposed to be good, and our defensive scheme got picked apart because Tom Thibodeau leaves shooters open. That's kind of just the philosophy of his scheme, and it's very easy to pick it apart. And then offensively, Brunson is just playing hero ball. He's hogging the ball. That's what it is. Everything is for himself. We saw the worst of it with the foul grifting in game two, and everybody criticizing that. But I think it's just not a great way to win. We often talk about heliocentric players, James Harden in Houston, Luka Doncic in Dallas, and people saying that play style can't win. Jalen Brunson plays that play style in New York. And the difference between him and those other players is that Harden at his best was better than Brunson, and Luka is better than Brunson. So that play style can only work if you are one of the three best players in the world, where your offense both as a scorer and a playmaker can handle that. And I think Brunson is more of a scorer, not enough of a playmaker, because when you are the point guard of a team, you are the guy that is basically the on-court coach. You have to be wary of the situation and tell yourself, Cat has only taken one shot in the second half. We got to get him going. And it's my job to get him going. And that's the duty of a point guard. And Brunson is not a real legitimate point guard. He's a scoring guard. And so he doesn't have that mindset. But when you're icing out every player on the team and Brunson is just going one-on-one, yeah, down the stretch, everybody's going to be cold outside of him.
I didn't think I would say this sentence before the series, but I would be legitimately shocked if they went to Detroit and won 2 games. Detroit is fresh off their first playoff win since 2008, I believe. They haven't seen a playoff game in person since 2018. It's going to be an absolute hornet's nest. And the Knicks, I'm sure you've heard this a million times, they're a 21-0 run away from being down in this series 2-0, and I would be shocked if they were able to get 2 straight wins in Detroit to close it out in 5 like we both predicted. Let's get into the 4-5 series out west. Clippers, Nuggets. Winner for me, 2019 Kawhi Leonard. He feels like he's fully back. If healthy, we said Clippers are the better team. I predicted the Nuggets. I bet against his health. I bet against James Harden. This is another thing I'm wrong about. I'm here to right my wrongs today, but it is what it is. The loser of this series was hard to pick. Ben Simmons was my choice for it. He's a former All NBA player,
Wow.
averaging 1 point in 10 minutes per game. But obviously, the Clippers are so deep and performing so well with their stars that it does not matter with Ben Simmons' performance at all. But Kawhi Leonard, seeing him in this form is something we didn't know was still there. This is a guy who got dismissed from Team USA, injury or not, in the final hours of training camp. This is a guy who really a lot of people were curious about what this team could be without Paul George. We now see the season that Paul George had and the choice that the Clippers organization made with James Harden and Kawhi Leonard. It was the right choice, but he's the biggest winner of this series thus far.
This series is going to have more winners and losers. It might not have any losers. I think this is the best series of the first round.
For sure.
And to talk about Denver, Jokic, fantastic, obvious winner. Jamal Murray has really bounced back and he's played well these first two games. Aaron Gordon, Russell Westbrook even. I mean, he has been huge for Denver and his impact on both sides of the ball. Michael Porter Jr. bounced back in game 2 in a big way after not being a factor in game 1. And then for the Clippers, healthy Kawhi Leonard. I feel like this is what we've been missing. When he is healthy, he is one of the very best players in the NBA. And there are very few players you'd take over him in a playoff setting because he's just that good. He was just making everything in game 2. I think Harden has played awesome in these playoffs as well, the first 2 games. I think Zubac has played really well. And I also think that the Clippers have gotten so much out of Chris Dunn. I think he was a defensive MVP of game 2. He was just everywhere. And him being able to hit some shots and drive to the rim and being aggressive on offense has really led to him getting more playing time. And they need his defense, so he has to continue to play well for them. So I think I'm not going to go with the loser in this series just because it's just been so close. If I had to go with one, it'd be Norman Powell because I think they can get more out of Norman Powell. The Clippers can. But the winner, underrated winner, is Jeff Van Gundy, Stan Van Gundy's brother. Yep. He is the Clippers defensive coordinator. And this year, the Clippers are 3rd in defensive rating. He has turned around the Clippers defense and they play with a sense of toughness that wasn't apparent last year. And many players on the team have talked about that it's night and day, and the changes that he's made has made them such a better team.
I'm interested to see what his coaching market looks like because obviously there's going to be a lot of vacancies as we go into the offseason, but his kind of coaching philosophy is really starting to get choked out of the league. Michael Malone, a guy who is kind of just one of those coaches that's leave me alone, let me coach the team. Jeff Van Gundy's a lot like that. And you're starting to see these general managers want to have a guy they can control. So I'm interested to see what his market is because no doubt he has made this team a lot better this season. He deserves a job, but how many young GMs are willing to go out there and risk hiring a guy like Jeff Van Gundy? If the Clippers remain healthy and intact throughout this entire series, because I played the if game on the other side of this last week, how many games do you think they can take OKC to in the next round?
I think it's 6. I don't think that they match up that well against OKC. And I think OKC has the defenders that can make it really tough on them. James Harden, he's playing great in the first round. Denver doesn't have an answer for him. If you put Lou Dort on him for an entire series, I think that he's kind of going to get obsoleted out of it. I think he's not going to be much of a factor. Chris Dunn's going to get left wide open. I just think the holes that they have, they're going to be more maximized against OKC. I don't think that they have a chance against OKC.
I think it's 6 as well. I think the matchup is better than you give it credit for because OKC obviously is at their best in transition, points off turnovers. The Clippers can somehow muddy that up defensively. I think it could be a long series for sure. 4-5 out east, Pacers, Bucks. Winner to me is the Tyrese and Dame feud by far. We knew there was smoke between these two teams, but how fast it has elevated between Damian Lillard and Tyrese Halliburton specifically has been absolute cinema. The loser in all this is the obvious thing. Me, for making the predictions I made last week, and also Giannis's future. I have to ask, going back to Milwaukee, are games 3 and 4 his last games in Pfizer Forum? And do you think he would be willing to go to a place like Brooklyn in the same city as your Knicks?
I don't know why he'd be willing to go there. They can't compete for anything, realistically. It's tough to think of trade packages for him. I think that there's going to be a lot of buzz this offseason about him getting traded. I know we say that almost every offseason with Giannis, but 2 years of the Dame experiment, two first round exits, really little to no room of flexibility to improve the roster. I think the writing's on the wall, and Giannis wants to win championships. I think he'll leave.
That's why this Nets thing's super interesting. They got 10 first round picks from that Kevin Durant trade alone. I think it was 4 or 5 for KD specifically, and then another 4 or 5 for the Mikal trade, obviously. And Mikal was in that Kevin Durant trade that started all this. I think assets wise, Brooklyn has the best package. It's just the same question I had is would Giannis be willing to go there? Would there be another move that Brooklyn can make? I think a lot of it depends on the lottery. If Brooklyn shakes out getting the number one pick, that's another conversation. But while we're on this Giannis and trade topic, I want to talk a little bit about Zion Williamson as well, because they were in the news. Obviously, the firing of David Griffin. They hired Joe Dumars, who was the disciplinary czar for the NBA. Now he's taken a role with the Pelicans. A rumor surfaced last week about ownership mandating that Joe Dumars trade Zion Williamson. Dumars has spoken since then and refuted that claim, but it was interesting because in his comments, he didn't say he was going to trade Zion, but he also didn't defend him. He said he wanted a team built on accountability and discipline. It felt like a subtle jab towards Zion Williamson. And also ownership has said they have given him full access to do whatever he wants to do. So those two comments combined feels like the Pelicans are ready to move on. And if you'd ask Zion, I feel like he is ready to move on as well. What do you think his future holds this summer?
I have a hypothetical scenario. I think Giannis gets traded to the Pelicans for Zion Williamson. Now, it sounds crazy at first because the Pelicans suck and they're going to get a top pick. But the year before, they won 49 games with Zion and Ingram healthy. The Pelicans not only have Zion, that I think is an asset, they have a first round pick that could be a top 5 pick in this draft. I think if you package Zion with that first and you give the Bucks 2 firsts additionally, they own, because of the Jrue Holiday trade they made with them a while back, they have pick swaps in 2026 and 2027. The Pelicans are able to get the better pick of the two. You give those picks full ownership back to the Bucks. I think you can sell yourself if you're the Bucks by saying, okay, we're getting a top 5 pick in the draft. We're getting Zion Williamson back, who has a lot of potential and maybe could turn into something for us. And if you're the Pelicans, I think Giannis with Yves Missi and Trey Murphy and Herb Jones and McCollum and DeJounte Murray, I think it's much better than anything Brooklyn can put on the court to compete.
If I'm Giannis, I would much rather go to Brooklyn. Not even for the stuff that you just named. New Orleans is number 1 ranked every single year for having the worst arena. And not only that, they still don't have their own practice facility. And Giannis, if I'm looking at Brooklyn, a team with assets, I want to go to a team that can still do something once I get there. In this Western Conference, Yves Missi and Giannis Antetokounmpo and Trey Murphy and DeJounte Murray is not going anywhere. I think
Herb Jones.
And Herb Jones. Okay, and Herb Jones. They're not going anywhere in this Western Conference. It now has Luka and LeBron on the same team, Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler on the same team, Oklahoma City still with 3 first-round picks to play with. I'm staying in the East and going to a team that can have flexibility. I'm already on a team that could not make a move, that built a jail for themselves after I applied pressure to them. I don't want to go to that exact same situation, not to mention the city of New Orleans, not to mention their facilities and all the problems with that. Brooklyn's the answer, but I do love the package that you put together for the Pelicans, because if I'm Milwaukee, that 100% makes sense to me, bro. Trading for Zion Williamson and getting that top 5 pick.
They need a bet on upside if they're going to trade Giannis. And the Nets, they have the picks to offer, but they don't have the player. I think when you look at Giannis trade destinations, it gets muddy, because if you're looking at the Knicks, you're thinking of a package of Cat and a first. It doesn't do anything for you. Right. You look at the Rockets out west, Alperen Sengun and a first round pick, maybe Jalen Green. Maybe it's a package centered around Jalen Green. I don't think that's enough. I think, you're crazy. I'm not trading Giannis for that. I think the Rockets would need to trade like 4 to 5 young guys. I think to get Giannis, they'd have to trade Jalen Green and Reed Shepard if they still want to keep Şengün and have Giannis. You have to make the contracts work, obviously, and you have to trade picks. And I don't think that Giannis and Şengün and the Rockets are that good of a fit either. So I think when you think about Giannis destinations, it's difficult because it's either the fit isn't there or the assets aren't there.
And the second part of that's what I'm going to talk about. Obviously, I don't think the assets are there for this certain franchise, but to me, there's really no better fit than Heat culture and Giannis. No, if Miami has anywhere near the assets to offer, I think Milwaukee's going to have a lot better options, but just on paper, that feels like a fit that Giannis would want, and I think I would want for Giannis. Speaking of the Miami Heat, let's go to the 1-8 out east. They played the Cleveland Cavaliers. They're down 2-0. Winner of this series, Donovan Mitchell in the playoffs. I don't have much to say about this series. The loser is Tyler Herro's defense. He's been phenomenal offensively, but Darius Garland saying what he said, and they're just going to keep picking on Tyler. It's the truth, and I'm glad he said it.
I think the winner has been the Cavs' clutch time offense. They've been tested in the fourth quarter in this series. Game 1 felt a little bit closer than it should have been. Game 2 was definitely much closer than it should have been. And the Cavaliers in both games went on fourth quarter runs. In game 1, it was led by Ty Jerome. And game 2 was led by Donovan Mitchell. And I feel like that kind of is just getting them ready, getting their reps up for when they're facing better opponents in the East, just being able to close out these tough, nail-biting games. And I think their fourth quarter offense has been in full display, and they've been one of the most clutch teams all season long.
Another series I'm sure we don't have a lot to say about. I have a lot to say about. You probably don't, just like the rest of the national media, because it hasn't been really a series. It's been a junior varsity team versus an NBA team. The winner of the Thunder Grizzlies series is Jalen Williams. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has struggled. The question was, can Jalen Williams be a secondary option on a title contending team? So far, it's yes, but you can point to the competition and say we don't have any real data on it yet. The loser is Jaren Jackson's contract and Ja Morant's agent. If Jaren Jackson made All-NBA this season, he was eligible for $345 million. I don't know how the voting's going to end up on that. There's a chance he will not be eligible for that anymore, and the Grizzlies have pretty much dumped all of their salaries to be able to pay him, and now they may not have to pay him all of that money. On the other hand, this summer is the first time Ja Morant is extension eligible. There never was rumors that he would sign something 100%, despite all the rumors that happened earlier in the past couple months. But I would imagine his agent is not running to the table this summer to start negotiating with the Memphis Grizzlies after going out like this. I'm talking to Tim McMahon tomorrow, and obviously almost every question with him is centered around the Luka trade, but I'm asking him about the Grizzlies GM, Zach Kleiman, and his future in all of this, because he fired Taylor Jenkins with 9 games left so we could retain Tomas Isalo next season. But by doing that, he's taken the spotlight off of Taylor Jenkins and put it directly on himself, because now ownership and the fans both see it's not just coaching that was the problem with this team, it was the roster. So I'm interested to see what effect that has on Zach Kleiman and his future, because he keeps making the same mistake over and over again. He's doubling down on youth. They let Dylan Brooks walk. They traded Steven Adams, and not only have they not replaced them, they haven't upgraded them either. OKC is the outlier of this league. They are young. But everyone, including myself, keeps talking about Detroit being a young team, but they're not. Tobias Harris has played in 1 million playoff games. Tim Hardaway Jr. has played in 1 million playoff games. So has Dennis Schroeder. So has Malik Beasley. The Grizzlies need veterans around Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. Yes, they are in year 6 and 7, but at some point it just boils down to personality. Kevin Durant is not a vocal leader. He never has been. It didn't stop him from winning a title. Yes, it was a broken team, but Draymond Green was the voice in that locker room, and he was the 3rd best player or the 4th best player on that title team. As an outsider looking in, Joel, what is your autopsy on this Grizzly season, and what is your outlook on their offseason?
To be brutally honest, I think it's a sneak peek of a potential rebuild. I think the Grizzlies have to start getting really aggressive about their future. This is the core: Ja Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr., Desmond Bane. You cannot continue to wait on them magically just developing into legitimate guys. I think they're all B plus players that aren't A plus players, and it's really hard to win with just B plus players. So I think they have to be ultra aggressive in making a move that's going to take them over the top to win a championship. And if that doesn't work, even if it blows up in their face, at least they made a move that was aggressive, because this core clearly is not going to win anything meaningful. So in order to see if you can, you have to make a risk like trading for Kevin Durant and adding him to the team. Maybe in the offseason, he's more inclined to go to Memphis, but that's the type of move that Memphis needs to make. And if it doesn't work out, you just rebuild and you start from scratch and you don't drag this on for 4 more years, because I don't think that it's smart to drag this on. I think they're kind of showing you what their ceiling is already. There's a lot of dysfunction going on, and Zach Kleiman, he hasn't made the best moves as of recently. When he first took over the GM job, he was hitting a lot of bases. He was getting on base, he was hitting home runs, but as of recently, that's not been the case. The Zaire Williams pick, the Marcus Smart trade, the Zach Edey pick. When
Jake,
you're
Jake
drafting players,
Roddy.
yeah, Jake LaRavia. When you're drafting players in the lottery, you're hoping to draft a high impact player who can be a serious contributor. And there have been hits. Jalen Wells has been a hit, but overall, Zach Kleiman has not done enough to drastically improve this roster. And then Taylor Jenkins gets fired, who built the culture and identity of Memphis, and now you have a new coach. So I think they have to get really aggressive about their future and their aspirations. And if it blows up in their face, then that's fine. But you can't drag this on for more years.
Ryan Russillo said something really interesting in passing on Bill Simmons' podcast. I think it was this week. And you never hear about the owner in Memphis. It's just not something you hear about. He's not an overbearing owner. He's not a vocal guy. He never speaks to the media. So whenever Russillo said this, it really stood out to me. And they were talking about Ja, if you could continue to build around him, blah, blah, blah. Obviously, they only talked about it for a couple minutes because this hasn't been a series. But he said ownership is in love with Morant. And as a smaller market, you can foresee why there's politics involved in this. They want somebody who can sell tickets and bring awareness to the franchise because they all are the smallest market in the entire NBA. So moving forward with that in mind, it seems like Ja will be a pinnacle of this franchise. I could be wrong, but I do agree with you. Something drastic has to happen. And I think the best thing that could have happened to this Grizzlies franchise is they lost that game 2 Tuesdays ago against the Golden State Warriors. I'm not saying they would take the Houston Rockets to 6 or 7 games. A general manager like Zach Kleiman can talk himself into, well, we don't have Jalen Wells and Brandon Clark. We could have been more competitive. They've lost by 70. They've lost by 70 points through 2 games of this series. Them playing OKC is the best thing to happen for their future because now they see they need something a lot bigger. You're starting Scottie Pippen and Zach Edey in the playoffs. Outside of 3 guys on this roster, nobody would get playtime for the Oklahoma City Thunder. And Kendrick Williams, a 11th or 12th man on this Thunder roster who had a DNP on game 2, would start for this version of the Memphis Grizzlies. Yes, Zach Kleiman has had hits, but he's had to have hits in the second round because he has done nothing else. They have drafted 6 small forwards, and none of them have been able to start for this team. Jalen Wells, as great of a story as it is, he's an average NBA player, and that's where I have the problem with Zach Kleiman because it's not only a mistake, it's the repetitive mistake of not bringing in veterans on this team. Are you telling me this team could not use Marcus Smart right now? It's not changing how this series ends, but they could use him. And the fact that they salary dumped him and had to attach a first to him is the problem. By the way, I'm going to game 3 tonight, so definitely pray for me.
Oh, man.
I know. Pray for me.
Hopefully it's a close game.
I know tickets. I was looking at tickets and they're cheaper than regular season tickets. It is shocking. You can sit at the lower level for under $100 in some spots. It is very, very low point. I'm interested to see how it's fills out in person because my imagination is that the sales office is probably giving away a lot of these tickets tonight because the fan base is that disgusted with this team.
And to your point about the ownership being in love with Morant, I think that if you don't make Morant available, you're limiting yourself. I think if you're super attached to him, not saying he's not a talented player, but if you are hell bent on the mindset that this is our guy no matter what, it is limiting.
My thing is, one, his trade value, and two, what trade return could you get that would push this team over some sort of edge? You know what I'm saying? Like, unless you're just talking about getting assets in return, what do you envision, that being so limiting for?
I don't think that Ja Morant can lead a team to multiple playoff series. It's not even just the NBA Finals. I don't know if he can
That's
lead Memphis to the conference finals.
that has been the truth thus far, and I'm not arguing that. I'm just asking, if you put him on the table, I don't know that the return will either. And whenever
No,
I'm the ownership looking at it like that, if his return will not get me multiple playoff series wins, why don't we just keep, if we're getting the same result in return, why don't we just keep him and the money that he's driving for our franchise?
that's why I think there needs to be a drastic move made this summer. I think we need to go after KD. That's the most likely realistic scenario, going after KD and then seeing what he could bring to the team, because ideally he is the missing piece for this team.
And I think Phoenix is going to be limited in offers, and seeing what Desmond Bane's trade value has there, and if they are limited in offers, if Phoenix would be willing to accept something with him as a centerpiece. I know this comes out on Friday. Obviously, I don't know the results of tonight's game. But Joel, thank you so much for taking time, and enjoy the NFL draft tonight, because I know you're going to be watching every second of it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on.